All of these videos so far have highlighted the 2024 rookie class, and rightfully so. They are garnering all of the headlines right now. They got us all hyped up. The training camp videos, the rookie symposium coming up. We'll get their first snaps in the preseason, so we are going to see them first, so we need to talk about them first. But this video, we are going to talk about the top 10 Dynasty defensive linemen coming into this next season. There are a few surprises in here. I'm a little bit against consensus on some folks, but I promise you there are valid reasons, and I believe that you should take this as a rubric to your leagues, and if you are doing startups, utilizing this, and I can kind of give you the understanding of why you want these players at these certain positions. So without further ado, let's talk about the defensive linemen in IDP fantasy football. My number one player is Las Vegas Raiders edge rusher Maxx Crosby. Crosby is the model of consistency at the edge rusher position. Not only can he get those explosive big point plays that we need to win our weeks, but he also has that floor where even if maybe the sacks aren't there for the game, he's getting enough tackles to justify this position. He has had back-to-back seasons of 80-plus tackles and 10-plus sacks. That is incredible, especially when you're trying to build an IDP dynasty team. He is the perfect person to start and be the cornerstone of your defensive team, but you know that there's still room to grow. He's still relatively young, and he's probably in the middle of what his prime seasons would be. I like to think that he's going to have 2 to 3 more elite years and then probably will tail off into the second tier of edge rushers, but we're talking 3 or 4 years down the road. Maxx Crosby will have elite production for the majority of the next few years and likely going into that 4th season. After that, you have to kind of change with where your league is going and where the NFL is going. But for right now, the 2024 season, my number one defensive lineman is Maxx Crosby. The second player on my list is edge rusher Danielle Hunter. That may be a bit of a surprise, but I promise you, he is younger than you think. He is currently 29 years old, which in edge rusher years is right about where the prime kind of shifts back to that, you regress to the mean. Isn't that what everyone likes to say, that fancy little word? But he's still kind of at that peak. I believe that with the new scenery in Houston, we could see a rejuvenated Danielle Hunter. And if he wasn't rejuvenated last year, then you're going to see some elite production. 4 of the last 5 seasons, he has had 10-plus sacks and 60-plus tackles. And that is with very limited high-level teammates that will garner some attention. Everybody on the opposite side of the ball knows that Danielle Hunter is a guy you have to stop in order to make your quarterback more comfortable. But he has been doing this alone. He now goes to Houston Texans with Will Anderson on the other side, who showed immediately upon his rookie season that he is a credible threat to offenses. Because of this, it will give Danielle Hunter more one-on-one opportunities, and he will thrive in this. And one last point. I know we always talk about how offensive skill players benefit from an offensive head coach. Danielle Hunter, in the inverse, will benefit from a defensive head coach in DeMeco Ryans of the Houston Texans. There you have it. He has a recipe for success. He's got high-level production. He now has a credible teammate to take some attention away, and he will be going to a defensive head coach. This is a big deal for 29-year-old and dynasty valuable Danielle Hunter. My third player on this list should be higher, but admittedly is not because I still have some concerns with the injuries, and that is edge rusher TJ Watt of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Everybody knows that when TJ Watt is healthy, he is the number one pass rusher in the NFL. I don't believe that there's any sort of question behind it. You could argue maybe two. But the reality is he has the biggest boom potential of this entire list. TJ Watt had one of the most legendary games on Championship Sunday for fantasy football where he had a 5.5 sack performance, or 4.5. You can Google the stats, but regardless, he had over 4 sacks in a championship game. And that type of level happens only with a very few amount of players. Watt, when healthy, is one of the most dominant players in this entire league at any position. The problem is he doesn't stay on the field. He's only had 2 seasons where he didn't have double-digit sacks, which is impressive. But even with all of the injuries that we see him have, he still produces at a very high level, which is why he's number 3 on my list. Now, like I said earlier, he should be number 1, but I just can't do it when there's so many injury red flags and we have such consistent and younger talent at this position. But I believe that TJ Watt at number 3 is fair. I don't believe he should go above the others, but if he were to go above the others in startups, it wouldn't surprise me and I wouldn't be mad about it. I just am a little hesitant with the injuries, and he is starting to progress in his career, and those will eventually add up. TJ Watt is one of the best ever at rushing the quarterback, just like his brother. So maybe it's a bloodline thing, maybe he's got a knack for making that next step, but regardless, TJ Watt is number 3 on my list, but I wouldn't be shocked if he finished higher. The 4th player on my list is edge rusher Josh Allen of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He is another player that probably should be higher, but I just don't trust his consistency week to week. He will have weeks where he'll have 2 to 3 sacks with 2 to 3 tackles, and it is a boom week that could potentially win you your matchup. But then he has just as many 1 tackle or 1 assist games with no other recordable stats. That to me is a volatility that I don't personally like to build my team around. However, if he's available at a certain cost or a certain value, I will snatch him up because I would hate to be on the opposite side of that matchup. He is still in his prime years, and I believe that he will still continue to be a better pass rusher. But until I personally see it, I wouldn't exactly spend the capital needed to acquire him on my team. Now, there are some silver linings to this. For instance, last season, he had his career high in sacks where he increased that total by a 7 spot. That is crazy. His career year, he had 7 additional sacks than the previous mark. He also still seems to be ascending. While he didn't have career highs in the other statistics, he still had a tick above his average to go with the new record for sacks in his season. So I believe that that gives me some dynasty value that we need to start digging on. But until I personally see the consistency with him increase, I would take him a little bit later in rounds. But as a dynasty asset, I would love to have him on my team, and he is definitely going to be in that 2nd or 3rd tier for me as far as putting a guy in there with potential boom weeks, but also the potential to bust hard. And it's hard to build a team with guys like that all over the place. You need to have consistent floors, so Josh Allen would not be that guy for me. But if you're looking for a chips in the middle dice roll and you need a big week to beat your opponent, he fits that mold almost better than anyone. Josh Allen coming in at number 4. The 5th player on my list is a player that many people should be familiar with, but probably aren't. Edge rusher Jaelan Phillips of the Miami Dolphins. Phillips has everything he needs to do to be a top 5, top 2 type of edge rusher, but he can't stay on the field. It is awful to see because he has everything going for him. He is young. When he's on the field, he is dominant. He has the stats to back it up. But you have to stay on the field to score. And in fantasy football, I don't have the roster spot for guys that don't play. But he still needs to be on a roster. He can't sit out there. He is at the very, very beginning of his prime. He has credible pass rushers around him with Bradley Chubb and the newly acquired Chop Robinson. He is probably more under the radar than he is underrated, but the reality remains. When he's on the field, he is a dominant player and should be started everywhere. But we have seen the injury bug bite him often, so he is risky. These players play such a high-level athletic position at the edge rusher. And I believe that sometimes their bodies betray them because they're going against equally athletic human beings on the opposite side of the ball. Jaelan Phillips may be an example of somebody who is so athletic whose body is betraying him. But he is still one of the most gifted people at this position in the entire NFL, and I just can't quit Jaelan Phillips. He is my 5th player for a reason, and I promise you, if he stays on the field, he will finish as a top 3 edge rusher in the NFL. But there's a big if there. And that is why Jalen Phillips is my number 5 player. The 6th player on my list is Myles Garrett, edge rusher for the Cleveland Browns. He's all reliable in IDP fantasy. He was the epitome of a set-and-forget guy at the peak of his career, and he still is that to a degree. But there are many times we will see him sort of disappear from the ether, and it is very frustrating to have a player like that, which is why I have him ranked out of the top 5. I believe that his elite level upside is kind of on a downtrend. I believe that we're going to see a bit of regression, but that doesn't mean he's bad. Regression to me means I need to start looking for ways around him, ways off of him. You don't want to wring players out like a washcloth, okay? You want to move off a player a year early as opposed to a year late. If you move off a year early, yes, he's going to score. He is going to give value to another manager in your league. But you will also be able to acquire assets that can benefit your team in the present tense. Myles Garrett is a great player to do that because he's younger than you think. All right, he is also a solid floor. He's going to give you a few tackles, okay? But when you have a Myles Garrett on your team, you don't want 2 to 3 tackles. You want 4 tackles, you want multiple sacks, you want him disrupting the quarterback, causing turnovers. And I feel like we are not going to get that as consistently as we are used to with Myles Garrett. He's at the end of his prime, but that means he's still in it. So at my number 6 position, he is still valuable. But I would look to potentially move him and acquire great assets, but do not lower your price. He is still Myles Garrett. He is still that dude, but I just believe we're going to see a change of heart. And when it happens with players like this, it happens fast and it's unpredictable. Myles Garrett comes in at number 6. Coming in at number 7, and quite literally the most away from consensus I am in this list, is Micah Parsons, the edge rusher for the Dallas Cowboys. I am not a Cowboys hater. I am not a Micah Parsons hater. I am simply a realist, and I am going to come to you with as factual information as I can, spun my very own way. Parsons is beginning to get a little noisy. And when we see players become noisy, we at times can see distraction. The Cowboys are no stranger to distractions. It feels as though every year, every week, every hour of every day, we talk about the Dallas Cowboys on sports talk radio, TV, podcast, YouTube, TikTok, and it's because they're the most noteworthy brand. But what comes with that is excess noise, and not noise that you want to hear. Now, Micah Parsons does not consistently perform to the value of his name. He is a star on the biggest stage for the largest franchise on earth. But he doesn't produce like that. He burst onto the scene his rookie year and has been living off name recognition since then. And I am no longer going to pretend that Micah Parsons is at an elite top tier place at this position. When he's on, he's no doubt a star. He is no doubt somebody that you want on your roster and not somebody you want to see on the other player's roster. But at the same time, he's got so much just leaving it out on the field, and it's like, come on, give me more. I need more. And that happens too often for me to invest the capital necessary to acquire him, and it's taking up a precious roster spot where you could have somebody who you got for greater value who could produce just as good of stats. I just don't trust him to consistently perform at a high level like his name would bring you. So I am a little bit further down than consensus on Micah Parsons, but I completely understand the argument against this. Parsons is number 7, okay? That's not a death sentence. That is not me saying he is a trash player, because he is a phenomenal athlete and he is great at the position. But there's a lot of noise for the Cowboys. He's got his own podcast. I believe he's drinking his own Kool-Aid a little bit. But he has to perform like rookie year Parsons. I will flat out come on here and I will tell you I was so wrong if Parsons puts up one of these high-level seasons that everybody predicts from him every single year. But until I see that, I'm lower than consensus, and I will stick to my guns here that Micah Parsons can and should perform better. And that's why he's number 7 on my list. The 8th player on my list is ascending edge rusher from the Detroit Lions, Aiden Hutchinson. Hutchinson is maybe one of my favorite players to talk about in Dynasty right now because he is ascending at a very, very fast clip, and it would not shock me if a year from now I am talking about him being a top 2 to 3 player. He has improved from that first year almost everywhere. We saw him have more comfort in the game. It seems as though he's playing with less thought in his head and more just aggressiveness. It's nice to see somebody do that. He is also 23 years old, so he is still at the very, very beginning of his career. I would argue he's not even entered his prime yet. He is going to be in his 3rd NFL season. He has had 2 full years to put on muscle and understand the game at the highest level. And now I believe with him and the confidence instilled in the Detroit Lions by Dan Campbell, he can and will be an elite player who may change games and fantasy matchups for managers with him on their team. He has top 3 upside. There's no doubt about it that he probably is going to go a little bit later in redraft than some of the bigger names, but in Dynasty, he absolutely should be a top 2 to 3 target for you if you were looking to build at that position. If a manager would even let him go, which I believe would be crazy if they did. But you have to look at more than just this tackle stats. You have to look at more than just pressure rate. Aiden Hutchinson has had 20 sacks in 2 seasons as a pro. I believe that he is going to continue to do this, and I could see him even having career highs this year in most of the measurable statistics. We usually see a leap from the sophomore to the junior year season of the NFL, and I believe that Aiden Hutchinson will match that. The hometown kid from Michigan will improve, and I believe that he could be on the top 2 lists of this next year. But for now, I've got him at number 8. The 9th player on my list is the famous edge rusher of the San Francisco 49ers, Nick Bosa. I am likely lower than consensus on this player as well, but I've got my reasons. I believe that we look too much into advanced metric stats. I think that we become paralyzed by the analysis that we have available at our fingertips, and I believe the person that has benefited from this, one of the most at this position, is Nick Bosa. We talked about it previously with Aiden Hutchinson. You have to look at more than just pressure rate. I don't get fantasy points by the percentage of times he's pressured somebody. Now, there are some fancy leagues where you get quarterback pressures, but in most standard IDP leagues, you only get sacks, tackles, and assists. And I don't care if Nick Bosa changed the play. I don't care if Nick Bosa kind of got to the quarterback or got to him just 1 second late. I need players to get them on the ground. And too often, because of how dominant Nick Bosa is, teams will scheme against him, and it will neutralize his floor, which therefore neutralizes his ceiling. Nick Bosa, if he was just getting one-on-one coverage, I'm taking him over 99% of the players in this league. But because he is such a recognizable name, I believe that teams do not want to lose to him as a player, so they scheme him out of the play, a la Belichick, but on the other side of the ball when he would scheme offensive players out. Nick Bosa is great, but I'm avoiding him because I like consistency. You have to have high floors in order to achieve what you want when building an IDP Dynasty team. And Nick Bosa's floor is not as high as you would think it would be. He is only 26 years old, so I believe that he is still in his prime. But I'm still a little wary that we've seen injury with him. The stats have fallen off the older he's gotten, and we have not seen the same player that we did when he first broke into the league as the second Bosa brother. I believe that he is still one of these players you have to have on a roster, but I'm about 1 year away from being completely off Nick Bosa because I just can't handle the inconsistency. I'm here to win championships, not fancy stats. And pressure rate is great if you get points for pressures, but most leagues do not give points for pressures, so you need to have people that get the ball on the ground, and right now Nick Bosa is okay at doing that. He is not as great as he once was. But he is still Nick Bosa. He is still 26 years old, and he can still get back to that elite form. And until we see that, we need to grade and measure him appropriately, which is why he has fallen to my 9th player on the list. And lastly, the 10th player on my list is the Houston Texans rookie phenom, now second-year player, Will Anderson. He absolutely broke out in his rookie year. He was everything and more you wanted from a high-level edge rusher. The Texans have done a phenomenal job of building this team in the DeMeco Ryans identity. He is a former linebacker for the team, and he is quite literally building a dominant defense, and he has a rookie quarterback to have that salary distribution to other players. He brought in Danielle Hunter, as mentioned previously in this video, and just as much as Will Anderson will benefit from Danielle Hunter being there, Danielle Hunter will benefit from Will Anderson. You can't single block these guys. Whoever doesn't get the double is going to have one-on-one coverage and have an opportunity to go to the quarterback. And honestly, it's a pick-your-poison approach if you're the Houston Texans. So double Danielle Hunter because you know he's a dominant player and you think Will Anderson had a freak rookie season. Well, guess what? You're giving this guy more one-on-one opportunities, which he has proven to win. He is one of these guys, the secret's out. Can he repeat? The only reason I don't have him in my top 2 or 3, which was extremely hard to do when getting all of the data and research ready for my ranks and getting stuff ready for this video, is because it's been one season. And I'm trying to keep the temperature down a little bit. I'm trying to have the expectations match what the player is giving me. But right now, I'm as hyped for Will Anderson as I am for any edge rusher in Dynasty. He's up there on a very short list of people who I would move many things, even high-level draft capital, to acquire. He is at the beginning of his career, and he has showed us that he can achieve many things that players who have played a long time cannot. And it's only been one season. Texans fans have a dominant pass rush now with Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, and I believe that this will directly benefit both of them in IDP fantasy football. But if you're a dynasty manager, you have to be pumped if you have Will Anderson on your team and you're seeing the defensive identity being laid out by Houston Texans head coach DeMeco Ryans. Rounding out my list is Will Anderson. Thank you guys so much for watching another video. We're talking more of the veteran players, some of the guys we got to know. It's been all rookies, but we finally are getting back to talking about the dominant stalwarts of this league. My name is Matthew Montgomery. You can find all of my written content on Football Guys and all of my video content on various socials, but especially on the RPO YouTube page. Thank you so much for everything you do, and God bless.